Access to medical care is becoming more and more of an issue here in Guam, and it doesn't even matter if you have the ability to pay. It's getting harder to see a doctor, to get an appointment, or to get the specialty care that you need. So I want to show you a growing solution to a growing problem. They're going to go out of their way to help find you a solution. And they've been growing their clinical services. Aside from this place looking and feeling homely, like this is their waiting area, like, I don't think that people really understand that they do full clinical services here. Like, this is one of their clinical rooms. Look how nice it is. You get your vision exam here. So do you need to see an OBGYN, get family medicine done, internal medicine done? This is all stuff that's done here at the Total Guam Foundation. And just to tell you again, this place is not for profit. This is the psychologist's office. Yes, they have a psychology department. They also do psychiatry. It's an entire mental health department that they have here on top of all the other clinical services that they provide. If you need medical care, if you're having problems getting a doctor, getting an appointment, call the Todu Guam Foundation at 649-TODU or 649-8638. You can visit them on the... Three cheers and hip hip hooray for the men and women of the Guam Power Authority who this morning got power restored to my area. Well, we had to shut off the breaker though because the power is like, I guess it's called dirty power or continuous brownouts or whatever, but I figure like that's like at some point very soon we're going to have stable power in my area. And so thank you so much, Guam Power Authority. And for those of you who already have power and it's going great, I'm happy for you. For those of you who don't have power yet, I'm sad for you. We're going to go over the list of what GP I'll be working on. So we'll talk about that first. Today's supposed to be my day off, but there's just so much catching up to do. I actually had this show ready to do like 3 hours ago, but I've just been so lazy and working on all these different things. But there are two real like big things to talk about, and it's because of the work that was done over at the legislature yesterday. I'm gonna save the $1,000, I guess you can call it a tax rebate, proposal by Senator Chris Barnett for its own show. I'll do that for the evening show. But I want to talk about the two other major things that the legislature has been discussing. And one is the admission from the administration that if the procurement protest fails, they're going to move forward. They're in agreement with the contractor, the developer, Cortec, whom the administration ranked highest in the Simon Sanchez High School procurement, to pay them $16.377 million for 32 years, not 30, and it's at the cap, but for 32 years, for a total payment to Cortec of more than $500 million for the construction of only one public facility. So that came out during legislative session regarding, or the committee of the whole regarding the budget. And there was a pretty good exchange between Senator Therese Terlahi and Lester Carlson, the budget director, about those 32 years. And the senator trying to get as much detail and as much confirmation out of the administration about what this deal is between the administration and Cortec. We'll play that for you, as well as other parts of that same committee of the whole where the senators were talking about essentially everything revolves around the Republican proposal to cut the BPT from the 4.5% that it's at right now to the 4% that historically the BPT has been at. It was raised back in 2018 to address the revenue slumps that arose from the Trump tax cuts during those days. And it was supposed to have had a sunset provision, but the following legislature removed the sunset provision and allowed the BPT increase from 4 to 5% to continue on. And that's where Governor Lulian Guerrero had her whole, she never wanted to roll back the BPT. The Republicans, they came back into power in the legislature on the promise of reducing the BPT back to the 4%. This was after Governor Lulian Guerrero and the Democrats had already reduced the BPT for most Guam businesses to an historic low of 3%. It's just for those larger businesses, and the argument is that many of these large businesses are not even from Guam. And the revenue that these businesses are making don't even stay on Guam for the most part. These are military construction, military development associated, military buildup associated businesses that are reaping these benefits. And so the big part of the legislature's argument with the administration or among senators themselves is, should we sacrifice, or what is it that this money would pay for? And there's a big argument as to whether there would be shortfalls between the Republican legislature and the Democrat administration, but there are also unlikely allies here in that Democrats who have been the loyal opposition, so to speak, against the Democrat administration find themselves on the same side of the street, at least in terms of whether to roll back the BBT and what to use that money for. And one of them is that conversation that I want to have separately, and that's the proposal for essentially a tax rebate for $1,000 per taxpayer. But we'll talk about that separately. What I want to talk about, what I want to show you actually, is the arguments that these senators make about whether the BPT should remain at 4.5% or whether it should be cut again down to the original 4%, who it should apply to, all that stuff. And then what are the services that the administration is saying would be jeopardized if this happens? And then what is it that the Republicans are saying? Because they're essentially saying that the administration is not telling the truth about the funding of public services. So we'll get to all of that, and we'll start with the whole power thing on the other side of the commercial break. Stick with us.
Kandit News is brought to you by 76 Circle K Guam.
So 74% of Guam, or essentially 3/4 of the island, is back on island power, according to the latest report from Guam Power Authority. This is as of 10 a.m. this morning. So you have to imagine that the results have been improving over since that time. GPA has been working pretty quick. As of 10 a.m. this morning, they've been able to restore 74% of the system load, leaving 26% left. As far as the feeders and the circuits that have been fully or partially energized, 87%. I think it's like 58 out of the 67 distribution feeders or circuits have either been fully or partially energized, leaving only 13%, or what is it? Just nine distribution feeders that need to be put back online. These are the focus areas that GPA is on for the next 3 days, starting with the north. P046 in Dededo, that's along Route 3 from the Route 1 intersection to Potts Junction, including Swamp Road, Machinanao, Chalancareta, and nearby areas. Isengsong to Fire Station, parts of Estumbo Gardens, and surrounding areas. That's a very big area. P240 to Muning. That's Route 1 North to East-West Center, Triple J, and DPW. Route 1 southbound, the top of Old San Vittoris Road and surrounding areas. P244 to Mon. That's Happy Landing Road, including Santos Way, a portion of Poly San Vittoris Road, including Burger King, Murata Lane, Suman Sands Plaza, Dusit, Duty Free, and surrounding areas. P271 Dedito, that's a portion of Harmon Loop Road and surrounding areas. I think that might be, I saw some people who were um, upset that parts of Liguan Terrace were not on, and Liguan, I guess Liguan Terrace has underground power. Maybe this includes you. Maybe this is like your P271. I'm not sure. P271 to Muning, that's Route 1 northbound toward Dos Amantes Plaza, Gamblery Street, Hamburger Road, and surrounding areas. And P330 Jigo, that's along Route 1 from Matagwak intersection toward Chalan Lachanch entrance, Chalan Kaskahu, a portion of Matagwak along Route 9, that's Machinana and Agafagumas, to Potts Junction to include Route 1 southbound Paradise Meadows, Chalan Kodda, and surrounding areas. Now for the central area, P250 Hagutnya, that's Hagutnya Swamp to Route 4 toward Afami Road and surrounding areas. P250 Chalampago Ordot, that's Route 4. Along Route 4 from Spring Lane to Route 10 intersection, including Deru Road, Maimai Street, and surrounding areas. P250 Sinahanya, that's Sinahanya Mobile, Holiday Towers, Afami Road, Chaut, and surrounding areas. P250 Mangilao, that's from Mangilao onto Derry Road toward Route 10, including DOC, portion of DYA, and surrounding areas. P251 Hagutnya, that's East O'Brien Drive, Route 1 and Route 8 intersection, including Bank of Guam, Reflection Center, Ada's Commercial Center, Big Hook, and surrounding areas. P251 MTM, that is Route 8 from Roy Damian Street, exit to ET Calvo Way, J.A. Camacho Street from East O'Brien Drive to Biang Street, Mongmong Catholic Church, Chamorro Gardens, and surrounding areas. P253 MTM, that's Sergeant Roy T. Damian Street, Biang Street, west to Totu Kenyatta Road, Route 8 from Shop for Less to Mighty Mobile, including West Cesario Street, Chalan Machauti, and surrounding areas. P294 Mangilao, that's Route 10 westbound from the Old Public Health to Route 4 intersection, Ta'i Mangilao, and surrounding areas. And P294 Chalampago Ordot, that's the Route 10 Route 4 intersection, Chalan Ping Pagu, Chalan Inda, Inaladu Road, Ta'i Road, Pago Bay Estates to Pago Bay Resort, and surrounding areas. And in the south, this is where GPA is focusing on for the next 1 to 3 days. P220 Santa Rita Sumai, that's Route 17 Cross Island Road up to Bishop Flores Street and surrounding areas. P221 Santa Rita Sumai, that's Santa Rita Village through Pali Ferdinand Way up toward Chalan Obispo, Olano to RR Cruz Street and surrounding areas. P223 Santa Rita Sumai, that's Route 2A from Taco Bell to Route 2, including Route 5, Sumai Payless and surrounding areas. P223 Hoggett, that's Route 2 from Route 2A intersection to Nimitz Beach, including In on the Bay, portion of Route 12, Pagacho Drive, Hoggett Village, Umang Road, and surrounding areas. P261 Talafofu, that's Talafofu Village, Route 4A toward Talafofu Bay, including Wolford Heights and surrounding areas. P261 Inalahan, that's the Malolo area, Poultry Farm, Dundon Road, Inalahan Mayor's Office, Inalahan Pool, Inalahan Village, Lada Lane, Inedu Lane, Bear Rock, Jesus M. Crisostomo Street, Inalahan Way, Iha Subdivision, Belen Avenue, Chagotmin Lagu, I hope I said that right, and surrounding areas. P262 Jotnya, that's Windward Hills, Baza Gardens toward Route 4 and surrounding areas. P262 Talafofu, Route 4A southbound to include Onward Golf Course, east side to include golf courses 10 to 18. Toward Route 17, Cross Island Road intersection, Ipan, Chalancanton Tossi toward Tun Mariano Road to include Jeff's Pirates Cove, Paris Heights, Cruz Heights, and surrounding areas. P294 Jotnya, that's Route 4, from Jotnya Village toward Pago Bay, MU Lujan Elementary School, St. Francis Church, portion of Pulantat toward Tracking Station and surrounding areas. P301 Jotnya, that's Pulantat, Chalan Teleforo, bottom of loop to Jotnia Cliffside to Elig and surrounding areas. P340 Humatek, that's Route 2 Humatek Village, Chalan Kantuntasi, including San Dionisio Street, JS Kanata Street, and surrounding areas. P340 Malesu, that's Route 4, Chalan Kantuntasi, Malesu Village, including Malesu Pier, Marito Elementary School, Kineni Road, Areolas Beach, Malesu Canoe, and surrounding areas. And finally, P340 in Alahan, Route 4, Chalan Kantuntasi, including Inedu Street, Inarahan Garden House, Tongan area, Agricultural Experimental Station Road, and surrounding areas. I hope if you do not have power, that whatever area you live in, I was mentioning there, or for whatever reason GPA just goes, I hope you get power today. I hope we all get power today. On the other side of the commercial break, I want to engage you in a continuing conversation about this issue of Simon Sanchez High School development. And it's interesting to me how the politicians couch this in terms of, oh, we need to do this for Simon Sanchez High School. You got politicians have been saying that since 2013, 2014. That's not what it has become. And the bottom line has never been to these politicians, at least those who have been in control, this school. It's very clear what has happened over the past how many years. And for whatever politician this has been benefiting, and for whatever developer this has benefited over the entire history of this stated desire by the politicians to get Simon Sanchez High School built, it's always been about the developer. It's always been about the money that was going to be tossed at this thing, public funds, to the point where if the development is allowed to go through as it is, despite the protests, despite the issues that the protester has brought up in how the procurement was done back in 2025 by the Leon Tenorio administration. We have an admission from Lester Carlson, the budget director who was on that negotiating team for SSHS and was the only one who, in those negotiating team meeting minutes and recordings, actually stood up to the developer and tried to get at least a mildly better deal for the people of Guam. Nonetheless, Lester Carlson, he admits that if this thing goes through, the people of Guam are going to be on the hook for a payment for the next 32 years of $16,377,125 every year for 32 years. That's more than $500 million for the construction of one public facility. That's an outrageous amount of money. It is outrageous and ludicrous that the people who were sitting on the government side of the negotiating table never once said, hey, let's negotiate this price down because this is the absolute limit that the legislature gave us. And then the conversation turns on, well, what did the legislature know and why did the legislature promise away this much, authorize this much money in the first place? Why did the legislature design things this way? And what exactly did the legislature know on every step of this whole thing? And so on the other side of the commercial break, I want to play for you a portion of the exchange between the legislature and Lester Carlson that happened yesterday as the legislature is discussing the fiscal year 2027 budget, and as the administration is asking for the legislature to not cut taxes so that, among other things, the administration can afford to pay Cortec $16.377 million, or what would be the first of 32 payments that would amount to more than $500 million. Now, whatever you might think about the tax break or the tax cut or keeping the tax rate as it is, for me, I want to separate these discussions because they're very, very distinct, but also worthy discussions. But it's just $500 million that takes the cake. That's way more than what this tax cut represents over the term. So we'll talk about those things. And I'll bring you the coverage on at least that portion of the committee of the whole over the legislature on the other side of the commercial break. Stick with us. So I'm going to play for you a portion of yesterday's committee of the whole where they talk about. Okay, here's the context. Okay, the discussion was not in direct terms of Simon Sanchez High School development. It was part of a larger discussion. The legislature has been talking about the revenues, and they work from a revenue level, and then they work out from there in order to match the budget to the total, match expenditures with revenues. And the big debate that the legislature is having is over the business privilege tax, which accounts for a big part of the revenue base. And the debate that's going on is whether to reduce the BPT, as the Republicans have promised, from 4.5 to 4%. In the beginning of the Republicans' term for fiscal year 26, the Republicans, they accomplished 50% of their election year promise back in 2024. They promised, they were like, when you elect us as the majority, we're going to cut the BPT from 5% to 4%. So they made it halfway there. And the BPT was cut from 5% to 4.5%. Now the Republicans are making or attempting to make good on the remaining 50% of their promise by, in this upcoming fiscal year, cutting the BPT again from 4.5% to 4%. They're running into resistance because the governor presented an executive budget request. They shorten it by referring to it as EBR, and you'll hear that in the clip that I'm going to play for you. But in her executive budget request, she designed the funding levels and she fit the funding of services and programs by pegging a revenue level at the 4.5%, which included the 4.5% BPT, not a 4% BPT. And there was tension between when this request by the governor and what it is that the Republicans have been trying to do. And one of the talking points, especially in the lead up to this thing, when there have been all of these different performance-based budget hearings and oversight hearings of the different agencies, a recurring theme is that the Republicans bring up is the lapses that each of these agencies has, meaning the amount of money that was appropriated in the current fiscal year or in a previous fiscal year, and that money was not completely expended. So one of the points that the Republicans continue to make is, hey, if we authorize you to spend this much, then authorization still exists because you haven't expended all of it. That means that there are these lapses, and so therefore we can account for those in providing for the new budget. And one of the things that the administration's central fiscal people, meaning the budget director Lester Byrne and the cash director, Lester Carlson and the cash director Edward Byrne, keep coming back to is, look, lapses, that's not an accounting term. That is a sort of identifying technique that we use to describe a certain thing that isn't real. So that you can already imagine how the Republicans have clawed back on that. But the So that is the full context of it, right? Like it's this fight on the BPT. One of the things that's being used in this fight is Simon Sanchez High School. No big surprise. That's always been used as a political tool, and when politicians have some sort of political ploy involving their, either wanting to get the headline on something or, maybe something more nefarious involving appropriations. But Chris Duanius yesterday in his scuffle with Lester Carlson in this same budget hearing, he was like, "Look, Lester, you guys never told us that that we were funding this thing at 32 years. We're only supposed to be funding this Simon Sanchez High School development thing for a 30-year leaseback period." And Lester Carlson says, "Look, I thought that too. And in the negotiations, I was the only one who was fighting back on it. But then it's in the law. You guys were the ones who wrote the law. The law does say 32 years. So the law doesn't say 32 years, but the law talks about a $16.377 million annual cap on payment for the leaseback period, the lease period, and the pre-development period. That lease and pre-development period is the 2 years extra. And so Lester Carlson, he answers these questions pretty directly. Sometimes some of the answers are pretty direct. Other answers, you're like, that didn't seem like an answer, right? But anyway, so after he and Chris Duenas go at it, he gets questions from Chris Barnett and then from Therese Terlahi. And then this is where Lester Carlson comes right out and says, yeah, it's $16 million for all 32 years. Now, my question is, now that the administration is admitting this, is the legislature going to do anything? Because, I mean, did we really set this up so that the taxpayers of Guam were paying more than $500 million for one public facility? I would like to think that that's not something that we were supposed to let fly, that this was some sort of mistake that senators made, that they were mistaken. Like what Ho Yun said in meeting one of the negotiations, senators have no idea what it is that they passed. Remember that the joke that he made, was it even a joke, or was he telling the absolute truth? And all those people in the administration started laughing with him as though they were in on this joke as well. Let's watch the exchange between Lester Carlson and at first Chris Barnett, and then it turns to Therese Terlahi.
Highlights of what it is that's not funded. There is like 95% of the requirements of the government of Guam that are funded. We're only talking about a handful or so of agencies that are impacted by the availability of funds and maybe not providing it to the level of the executive budget request. I want to make sure that everybody understands there's a lot of good, but there's also some stuff that needs to get done. And I did take the time during before you came.
Okay, give me a second. I don't know what happened and why it's not standby. I don't know why it's not. Okay, give me a second. I don't know what happened. Sorry, let me just redo that. Let me try to bring this back. Sorry, pardon me. Okay, let's try this again.
Not me.
That's cool.
Not me.
32 years, baby. Let's go.
Yeah.
It's a change of heart up in here.
I'm not, that's what he wants. It's not me.
No, I'm saying from the body. That's a big change from when we roasted you down here.
$377,125 per year during the pre-development, on page 7 of Public Law 3722. And it says, any pledge or reservation authorized hereunder shall be valid and binding from the time the pledge or reservation is made, and shall be limited to the sum of $16,377,125 per year during the pre-development, construction, and leaseback period. Now, the section before it talks about the financing. It's 58D 108 on page 6. Well, the financing is a 30-year term, not to exceed 8.5%. So the financing term is 30 years, but then this section here allows for the pre-development and construction. So we read that as the 2 years that would ordinarily be covered by capitalized interest that I was trying to avoid paying, but this is the section that basically is being utilized to secure the bond proceeds that would be generated plus the $32 million.
Thank you, Mr. Carlson. On the Department of Corrections, so in the last budget cycle, I was able to successfully appropriate $5 million towards the construction of a new prison over the objections of the Chair of Public Safety. And there were indications made that that $5 million is still sitting in a bank account somewhere, but you had offered something different in that we've kind of begun moving forward on the construction of a new prison, because I'd like to appropriate another $5 million for that in this budget cycle, if I get the support for it.
So, Mr. Byrne, in November of last year, took a look at the appropriations against the excess revenues and advised the governor that we should probably not entertain lapses because those lapses were indeed already spent. And so we have made a rule that we're not going to take the myriad of agencies that were given prior year authorization to tap lapses. So we're not entertaining the use of any lapses as a fiscal measure. And DOC had a $5 million appropriation, of which $1 million they could use for operations. They used that $1 million, but they're not able to touch the $4 million that was unspent because of this fiscal control that we have with regards to lapses. So the appropriation in 26 for DOC is to use the 25 lapses, and we're not allowing that. So they don't have any money.
So you had said that they were moving forward. What
Yes.
did you mean by that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that takes care of them having money, which they don't. So we did sit down and we have an agreement with the Department of Corrections to build right in front of where the domes are. There's a big open area there. It's level to provide a facility, not the modernization plan, which is kind of like expensive and certainly not within the authorization that the body passed for a lease back of $5 million a year. So we're trying to do something within the parameters of what was authorized by law.
So basically, no matter who builds Sanchez or who builds the new prison, we've got to pay for it, but we can't pay for it in this bill because we've chosen to prioritize the rollback of the BPT. I know we have a second round, but I have an amendment that would keep the BPT at 4.5% and redirect that funding towards $1,000 individual assistance grants per household for typhoon recovery or preparation. Now, should that amendment pass, and I hope it does, is it your opinion that we would have enough excess revenues to address all of the concerns on the list, the punch list here, as well as things like new police cycles, more cycles for customs, et cetera.
I like where the speaker was going when he spoke earlier about monies that have not been appropriated in 26. That certainly, it's cash. We know it. We have it. This body is able to then, put on your crystal ball and fund stuff with the cash that we have now for 27. You can meet some of these needs that we have in 27 with the 26 cash. I'm not here to bust anybody's balls or to break glass or anything like that. It's we know what it is that we need, but there are other ways to be able to get there.
I'm not sure. Was that an answer?
It was to me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll proceed in the second round.
I like the speaker.
Senator Talai, you recognize.
Oh, the thing stopped again. Anyway, so I don't know where it left off there. I didn't notice. Hold on. Let me bring this thing back to me. I'm looking for the dumb. Oh, there it is. The camera setting. I did not notice where that thing stopped. I'm having problems with technical issues. Anyway, so did you catch the part where Lester Carlson says that that what it is 16.377 million for 32 years, and that's what the developer wants. And if the procurement goes through, that's what it's going to be, $16.377 million for 30 years. Now, it is no longer just investigative reporting, us doing the math and putting it out there for you. Now you have the budget director, a guy who was part of the negotiating team, telling the legislature on the record during budget deliberations that that's exactly what it is. $16.377 million every year for 32 years. And the budget director, he puts it back to the legislature. He says, you guys are the ones who authorized this. Now, there is, during the negotiations in July of last year, the legislature was in session for the fiscal year 26 budget. That's the current budget, not the one that they're talking about right now, but the budget that the government's operating under. In July of 2025, as the Simon Sanchez procurement negotiations were happening behind closed doors, the legislature was deliberating the fiscal year 26 budget. And Senator Joseph Augustine at the time, he made an appropriation amendment to appropriate $16.377 million for Simon Sanchez High School leaseback payment, which was an odd thing because the leaseback period doesn't start until the school is constructed and turned over. Nonetheless, senators passed that appropriation. Odd thing, but still the senators passed it, okay? In December of 2025, Senator Chris Duenas and 4 or 5 other senators introduced a bill to make an amendment to that appropriation. It keeps the appropriation and it keeps the lease back, but then it adds the language and associated pre-development costs. I'm not sure if that's an exact, if that's verbatim, but it's something like that. It adds pre-development costs, which is an additional appropriation on top of the 30 years of whatever it's going to be, because at the time, those details had not come out yet. So at the time the legislature did this, they understood that there was a 30-year lease back payment, and that at the time that Joseph Augustine made the appropriation, that first year was going to be $16.377 million. So on top of that, what the legislature did when they passed Chris Duenas' amendment bill in January of 2026 was they added a 31st year and a payment of $16.377 million on top of what the offerers, what the developers were made to believe was the financial scheme for this thing, which was supposed to have just been 30 years. So the legislature makes this change. I've reached out to the office of Senator Duenas to ask why they did that. Why did they add this additional year? Who asked for this additional year? What did the administration say to them about this? Because it's bizarre. Now, things get a little confusing on the discussion on this Simon Sanchez High School thing because of how it's being treated in this budget in relation to the BPT. All of this stuff, all of these arguments that are being made in the legislature now are about the BPT and whether to reduce it to 4%. And I was going to play you the rest of this whole thing that showed how the senators were talking about this stuff, but it's for whatever reason, it's not working for us. So on the other side of the commercial break, I'll just very simply go through what it is that the administration is alleging that the the reduction in revenues by reducing the BPT would result in lowering of certain services and program funding levels that would endanger who the administration is saying if this is done, like these are programs for some of the most vulnerable. And the legislature, or Senator Christuenius at least, has come back to attack each of those allegations point by point. And so I wanted to bring that point by point comparison of what each is saying to you on the other side of the commercial break. Stick with us.
Guam AutoSpot is extending our overstock sell-off with the hottest deals on island, like our 2025 GMC Canyon with $4,000 off. Or slide into a brand new Mitsubishi Eclipse Cross, starting at just $24,995. September is your chance to drive big and save even bigger. Visit us today or get pre-approved online at guamautospot.com or call 478-AUTO. Guam AutoSpot, where the savings never stop.
The Republican senators are essentially saying, hey, look, we have this promise that we made to the people of Guam, and we're going to fulfill that promise. And that is to reduce the BPT back to its historical level of 4%. It was a rate that was changed back in 2018 from 4% to 5% to address the revenue loss that stemmed from the Trump tax cuts. I think there was a big drop in corporate income revenues at the time. And so to address it, then Governor Eddie Calvo and the Republicans in the legislature, who were a minority at the time, together with some of the Democrats in the legislature at the time, they all agreed that they were going to increase the BPT from 4 to 5%, and it was going to sunset, I think, like in 18 months or 24 months or something like that, maybe even 12 months. The revenue generation from that BPT was so golden that the following year, when Governor Leon Guerrero was looking at the budget, she was like, no, we're going to keep it at 5%. And legislature, can you remove the sunset provision? The legislature removed the sunset provision. The next time the budget came around, the Chamber of Commerce was like, hey, look, you guys promised that you were going to roll back the BPT. And the governor was like, never, I never want to roll it back. So the Republicans, they secured the legislative majority for the first time in 20 years, I think it is, back in the election of 2024, largely on a mandate of rolling back the BPT. So they start with 50% of their promise being met with the fiscal year 26 budget, and the rollback of the BPT from 5% to 4.5%. And now they're looking to accomplish in this one term what they promised to accomplish in this one term, and that would be the full rollback to the 4%. They're running into resistance, and the first major resistance they got was the governor's executive budget request, which assigned expenditures based on a revenue level that included not a 4% BPT, but a 4.5% BPT. And so the Legislative Finance Committee, the Legislative Budget Committee, run by Senator Christuenius and the Office of Finance and Budget, substituted the budget now the legislature is working with a substitute budget that was created by the OFB, by the Republicans. And the administration came back with a list of what's wrong with the legislative substitute budget. And it's all about how the BPT slash to 4% would erode revenues to the point where all of these different important programs would not be funded. And so this is, I want to go point for point on each of these things, okay? I'm going to go with what the administration is saying, and then the counterpoint by Senator Chris Duenas, or the Office of Finance and Budget, of what Senator Chris Duenas has to say about that. And so let's open this. Stand by. So in the first point that the administration makes is no funding for the legislature's substitute bill has no funding for Simon Sanchez High School construction leaseback payment of $16.377 million. Chris Duenas says BBMR objects that substitute bill 266 does not provide an additional $16.3 million for SSHS. There is no current contract or legal obligation requiring an additional appropriation in fiscal year 2027. That's true. This legislature also appropriated approximately $16.3 million for SSHS in the fiscal year 26 budget. That money has not disappeared. It remains available because the Department of Public Works and this administration have failed to successfully execute the procurement. The failure to execute the procurement is true. That's a fact. Now, whether the money remains, that's disputed. So, according to Lester Carlson, in that portion of the hearing that the thing wouldn't let me play, those lapses no longer exist at the levels that the legislature thought they did. They're not backed up by actual cash or authority that the governor would have to make transfers. And so there's a big dispute as to whether that $16.3 million for FY26 is even there. And frankly, that's a good thing, because are we just giving up on this? Or are we really going to pay $500 million to one developer for one school? I mean, I think I'm very much stuck on that part, right? But Senator Duenas raises a good point. Why do you need $16.3 million for a leaseback payment that is not going to start until the school is built and it's handed back to the government of Guam? That's the leaseback period. Like, why are we paying now? Anyway, Chris Duenas continues. He says this administration took office on January 7, 2019. As of July 10, 2026, it has had 2,741 days, or 391 weeks and 4 days, or 90 months and 3 days, or 7 years, 6 months, and 3 days to deliver a new Simon Sanchez High School. After all that time, the students, teachers, and families of Simon Sanchez High School still do not have a school. 7.5 years and still nothing. Instead, the people of Guam have heard one excuse after another: procurement delays, protests, redesigns, repackaging, rebid attempts, and repeated requests for more money. Enough is enough, Senator Duenas says. The procurement has been delayed by protests, and the Office of Public Accountability has identified issues requiring a response from DPW, an agency under this administration. Media reports have also raised serious questions about whether the procurement was structured and conducted in the best interests of the people of Guam. The legislature appropriated the money. The executive branch had 2,741 days to get the job done. The administration should stop asking taxpayers to reward years of delay and another appropriation. It must comply with procurement law, transparently address the issues that have been raised, and finally execute the project. Our children should not have to wait another day because this administration continues to put excuses and politics ahead of their education. Okay, so that's the point for point on Simon Sanchez. The administration says that the legislature's budget has no funding for DOC modernization or $5 million. Chris Duenas says, based on discussions with the Department of Corrections and its ASO, That appropriation remains unused and intact. They're talking about a $5 million appropriation that's in the current budget. Before BBMR demands another $5 million, it should explain why the existing $5 million has not been used. Lester Carlson, he addressed that, and according to Lester Carlson, this is another disputed thing, is that's not $5 million that actually exists because the legislature used lapses in order to cushion that, and there's no transfer authority for the governor to use because there's no authority to back it up. The Senator Duenas continues saying this is not presently a cash problem, it is an execution problem. The administration disputes that. The administration should follow the law, move the modernization effort forward, and stop using unexecuted appropriations to create a political narrative that the legislature is failing to fund public safety. From the administration, the substitute bill adopted the same revenue for Guam Highway Fund as the executive budget request. However, there is no provision to extend the Gas Tax Relief Act into FY 2027 in the substitute bill. According to Senator Duenas, that's something that essentially could come up in the discussion on the bill. He says BBMR identifies the Guam Tax Relief Act as an objection to the substitute budget. That law has sunsetted. Its possible continuation has historically been addressed through a floor amendment and remains a policy decision for the full body. The absence of a sunsetted program from the introduced substitute is not an unnoticed reduction or a budgeting error. The legislature will openly debate whether the program should be renewed, modified, or allowed to remain expired. Is that the one that I think that's like 11-cent gas tax, right? Is that what that is? Anyway, here's a big one. The administration says that the legislature's budget bill reduces funding for public health. It's a $3.9 million reduction overall in local funds versus the executive budget request. But apparently that kind of match has a very big or an exponential effect on the federal matching funds that would come in. So compared to the executive budget request, the administration says the $5.8 million reduction in local match equates to a $28.9 million reduction in federal match for Medicaid. The substitute bill adopted the same total federal match funds in the EBR for public health, but did not follow the allocation of local match, thereby reducing the actual federal match that will be available for public health by $26 million. There's also a federal split, a federal local split that the administration is saying the legislature got wrong. The substitute bill kept the funding ratio for public assistance payments at 50-50, the administration says. However, it will be a 75% local, 25% federal match in FY 2027. The legislature is saying, at least Senator Duenas is saying, those representations are false. Senator Duenas says the public health budget and substitute bill 266 was developed through direct discussions between the Office of Finance and Budget and public health representatives. The agency worked directly with OFB on its proposed appropriation and confirmed that the amount provided in the substitute budget is sufficient to meet its anticipated needs. BBMR describes the Medicaid adjustment as a $5.8 million reduction. In practical terms, the adjustment is approximately $3.5 million because public health historically does not reach its full federal matching ceiling. A theoretical federal ceiling is not the same as the amount an agency can realistically draw down and expend. It is misleading for BBMR to multiply every local dollar adjustment by the maximum federal matching rate and then present the result as a guaranteed loss of federal funds. That calculation assumes public health would have reached the ceiling, had the operational capacity to expend every dollar, and would have successfully drawn down the full federal amount. Its historical expenditure pattern demonstrates otherwise. Public health receives a lump sum appropriation supporting its operations and programs. How those funds are prioritized within the department is an agency-specific management responsibility. The legislature establishes the appropriation. The agency must manage that appropriation responsibly and prioritize spending according to its statutory duties, caseloads, and program needs. Regarding the FY27 funding ratio for public assistance payments, the figures included in the substitute came directly from public health. The agency confirmed that the amount provided is sufficient. BBMR also argues that the substitute's $1.8 billion increase over the current fiscal year is insufficient. That increase was developed with consideration of the agency's actual expenditure pattern, including approximately $2.5 million in projected lapses. The administration also says that the legislature's reduced funding will reduce funding for Guam behavioral health by $2.9 million from the executive budget request, and this will impact contracts for patients to include the Level 2 residential services, drop-in and resource center for the homeless, that's Guamani, youth therapeutic group home, that's a Ladi treatment center, inpatient meals, doctors on-call fees, medications, and medical supplies. The administration says that what does the legislature say about it? The legislature is saying that they are not reducing behavioral health below its current year appropriation, but it is reducing it from what the executive branch requested. It increases funding for the agency's overall operations by more than $2.2 million over the current fiscal year. OFB reviewed the agency's request while taking its actual spending and projected lapses into account. Behavioral health is currently tracking approximately $2.1 million in lapses. That fact matters. BBMR cannot demand that the legislature fund the entire executive budget request while ignoring millions of dollars the agency is projected to leave unspent. Yeah, but I'm wondering, why was the money unspent? Is it because they weren't allowed to spend it because the lapses weren't real? I think that question needs to be answered. Anyway, continuing. The legislature takes residential treatment, homeless outreach, youth services, inpatient meals, physician coverage, medication, and medical supplies seriously, but simply listing critical services does not prove that every dollar requested is necessary, properly calculated, contractually obligated, or capable of being spent. Okay, I understand. I get all those points, but I can assure the legislature or anybody interested in this that absolutely not enough money is being spent on substance abuse rehabilitation, and that I would venture to guess that these programs that are being talked about could really stand to use substantial investment, and whether that investment has to be made by the legislature, right? But whether the agency itself has the capacity, as the legislature is saying, to implement, to execute, that's a whole other story, right? Like I don't know what the capacity issues are, but I mean I'm certain that these programs need absolute investment because there's just not enough of these services out on the streets. So I think the legislature has to be far more careful on how it talks about this stuff. I hope they're not dismissing, or they're not being dismissive of the needs and the gaps that there are, and that funding is a big deal. It's a big thing to it. There are other things. So there is a reduced funding for residential treatment fund. The administration is saying that the legislature is underfunding the program requirement based on actual expenditure rates for past years. Let's see. Did the legislature address this? Yes. The legislature says that description ignores the comparison that actually matters. Substitute bill, the legislature's bill, provides an increase for the residential treatment fund over its current year appropriation. An amount below the executive budget request is not automatically a cut. The EBR is a proposal submitted by the administration. It is not the baseline against which every legislative appropriation must be measured. The proper comparison includes the current year appropriation, actual expenditures, existing placements, contractual obligations, projected needs, and available balances. The substitute increases the amount available for residential treatment compared with the current fiscal year. BBMR should not publicly characterize an increase as a reduction merely because the legislature did not provide every dollar requested by the executive branch. The legislature will fund legitimate treatment needs, but budget decisions must be based on actual obligations and realistic expenditure projections, not on the assumption that every executive budget request must be adopted in full. Okay. And then there's cuts that the administration is saying were made to public safety agencies and to supplemental annuity benefits below what the legislature, below what the governor requested. And the legislature is making the same point, right? They're saying we're giving them more than current, but we're not giving them as much as the governor has asked for, which doesn't make a cut, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think these guys are anywhere closer to discussing the actual programs and what the programs really do need in order to function at baseline versus optimal levels. My friends, I don't think our government is anywhere near being that fiscally mature, at least not yet, right? And in these back and forth discussions on these pretty critical programs, you don't see any sort of specificity on the type of money that's needed and the defense of that money and defense of these programs, or on the legislature side, whether there's a proper defense for the amount of money that they've allocated based on to each of these programs, and how that has been affected by their number one priority of cutting the BPT from the 4.5 to the 4%. And now, from what I understand, Senator Chris Barnett introduced, and he said so in his morning comments that we played for you a little bit earlier, an amendment that he had to this budget that would keep the BPT at 4.5% and the savings, so-called, that would be realized from not cutting the BPT, a portion of which he wanted to dedicate to give $1,000 individual assistance. I have to imagine to taxpayers. I don't know who the qualified recipients would be, but $1,000 in what he would call typhoon relief, individual assistance for typhoon relief. It's kind of like a tax rebate. $1,000 tax rebate is probably essentially what it is. And it's an interesting thing because, well, it accomplishes what the Republicans have said is the purpose of their BPT cut, but in a way that spreads the wealth a whole lot more evenly. So the Republicans, they want to cut the BPT in order to put money back into the economy more directly. That's essentially what it comes back to. And the Republicans, they believe in the trickle-down effect. Or if they don't believe in that trickle-down effect, then they don't care where the money goes and how the money circulates, right? What Chris Barnett and whoever has voted for this thing, I understand that it failed. At least that's the information that I got, but I'll verify that. Chris Barnett and whoever voted for that motion would like that money to go back into the economy as well. And their solution for it was to give $1,000 to, I think it's each taxpayer, so that each taxpayer could spend that money out in the economy. Very interesting, very, very interesting proposal. And I think we'll talk about that on its own. I don't know if we'll have an evening show. I'm kind of tired, but let me try and at the very least find that clip so that we can see what exactly these legislators discussed and how the debate went, because as I understand it, the Republicans were in full force in opposition to it. And what were the reasons that they were opposed to it if their stated goals were pretty similar in bringing that money back into the economy and away from the grip of the munching government of Guam and, you know, all of those public funds. Anyway, I'm not sure if we'll have that conversation tonight or we'll move that conversation tomorrow morning, but it is the next thing that we'll talk about. For Kandit News, I'm Troy Torres. You all have a wonderful day. God bless you all.